shut off in 4 minutes anyway. Okay. Now we know our A is equal to 1 here, so we don't have to worry about step 1. So we just go right to the second step. Okay. So we isolate our x terms. Okay, so that means we have x squared plus 2 over 3x. If we subtract 6 from both sides, it's going to equal negative 6. We know our A is equal to 1, and our B is equal to 2 over 3. Okay. So now we find our completing the square value. So remember, your completing the square value is equal to B divided by 2 times A squared. And if you wanted to, you could rewrite it as B divided by 2 times A squared, if you wanted to, which is equal to B, which is 2 over 3, divided by 2 times A, which is 2 squared, which is equal to 2 over 3 times, and we flip our second one. That becomes 1/2 squared, which equals 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times, actually you could have just cross canceled, but no point in doing that now. And if we divide both of those by 2, we end up with 1/3 squared. You want to remember that value. So that gives you 1/9. Okay, and that's what you're going to add to both sides. Okay, so that means we end up with x squared plus 2/3 x plus 1/9 equals negative 6 plus 1/9. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, ended up with a different value. I think you had a different number other than the 6. All right, so we did everything right. Uh-oh. This should actually become x plus 1/3 squared. Okay. Equals negative 6 plus 1 over 9. Go ahead and do that one on the side. Negative 6 plus 1 over 9. If we want to have our like denominators, we can make that, instead of negative 6, make that negative 54 over 9, which is still equal to 6, plus 1 over 9, which is negative 53 over 9. Okay, so we have negative 53 over 9. Okay, so now our fourth step, we apply the square root property. Okay, so we have x plus 1/3 squared equals negative 53 over 9. Just square root both sides. Okay, so you know you have a negative square root, so you know you're going to end up with a complex answer, or a set of complex answers. The square and the square root cancels out. So you have x plus 1 over 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative, actually might as well pull the negative out now. Say 53 over 9i. Okay. So now we just subtract 1/3 from both sides. So x equals negative 1/3 plus or minus the square root, and instead of 53 over 9, square root of, I'll make the entire thing. So you have the square root of 53 over 9. That's just the square root of 53 over the square root of 9, which we can just make the square root of 53 over 3. Okay, so that gives us plus or minus square root, 53 over 3. I. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, you can leave it like that, or you can combine your denominators. So there are probably a couple of ways you can answer this one. So you can leave it like that, or you can make it x equals negative 1 plus or minus square root of 53i all over 3, since you have the same denominator. Or you can break them apart to two separate ones. Completely depends on what they ask for. So x equals negative 1/3 plus, and I'll put it all as 1. Square root of 53i over 3, or x equals negative 1 minus square root of 53i over 3. So now you see why checking it is optional. It'll be probably longer to check it than it is to actually solve it. All right. Any questions on this one? All right. Okay, so now we're going to cover the quadratic formula. Okay, so what if we let ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 represent our quadratic equation? Okay, so let's say we subtract c from both sides. That means we'll have ax squared plus bx. If we subtract c from both sides, that would equal negative c. Okay. And since we don't know if that a is equal to 1 or not, we'll just go ahead and divide every term by a, just to be on the safe side. So divide by a. So if we divide every term by a, anything divided by itself is just 1. So you have x squared plus b divided by a x equals negative c over a. Okay. So if you look at it, what we've done, we've isolated our x terms. So since we isolated our x terms, might as well complete the square. Okay, so if we are completing the square, b divided by 2a squared is just b squared over 2a squared, which is 4a squared. Okay. So if we're completing the square, we're actually going to add that to both sides, so we might as well go ahead and do that. So you have x squared plus b divided by a x plus b squared over 4a squared is equal to negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay. So here, let's say if we want to get common denominators. That's x squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared equals, so instead of negative c, we wanted to match that one, so we multiply the numerator and denominator by 4a. So minus 4ac over 4a squared plus b squared over 4a squared. And if we want to, we can just go ahead and combine those two and make them one fraction. X squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared equals negative 4ac plus b squared all over 4a squared. Okay, so just like before, once you complete the square, it turns that into a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so this side just becomes x plus b divided by 2a. Because we didn't plug anything here, so that's really the only value we have to remember. Oh, should have made that a little bit lower. Uh-oh. Okay, so we have our x plus b divided by 2a squared equals negative 4a squared plus b squared divided by 4a squared. Oops, clean that up. Okay, so now we just square root both sides. And okay, so if we square root both sides, the square and the square root would cancel out. So you have x plus b divided by 2a equals the square root. Uh-oh. Why did I put a squared? That should be a times c. Yep, that's 4a times c. There we go. So 4 negative 4a times c plus b squared all over. So if we have the square root of 4a squared, remember that's just 2a. That's the square root of 2a squared. Oh, clean that up a little bit. Where the square and the square root cancels out, and that's just 2a. Okay, so that's over 2a. Okay. So now if we're solving for x, we just subtract b over 2a from both sides. So that gives us x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus, oh, she got my plus or minus, just how easy it is to forget. Instead of negative 4 times a times c plus b squared, I'll just make it positive b squared minus 4 times a times c. So you have the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. And we'll just go ahead and combine those two. So you have x equals negative b, uh-oh, forgot my plus or minus. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And that's your quadratic formula. Okay, so you don't have to remember all of that, but this is your quadratic formula. All right, leave that up for a little bit. There we go. Right, so let's do a couple of examples. Okay, so let's say if we wanted to solve 2x squared, clean that up, minus 5x minus 3 equals 0 using the quadratic formula. Okay, so we know if we have 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 equals 0, your a is equal to 2, your b is equal to negative 5, and your c is equal to negative 3. Okay, so if we use the quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so that would equal negative b, which is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 5 squared, minus 4 times a, so that's times 2, times c, that's times negative 3, all over 2 times a, so that's 2 times 2. Uh-oh. Okay, so this ends up equaling negative 5, that's just 5, plus or minus the square root, negative 5 and negative 5 is 25, minus 4 times negative 2, well, 4 times 2 is 8, times negative 3 is negative 24. You have a negative and minus, so that's plus 24, all over 4, which equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4, which means that x equals 5 plus or minus square root of 49 is 7 over 4. Okay, so we can just separate them. So x can equal 5 plus 7 over 4, or x can equal 5 minus 7 over 4. Okay, so 5 plus 7 over 4 is 12 over 4. So x can equal 3, or 5 minus 7 over 4, that's negative 2 over 4. So x can equal negative 1/2. All right, any questions on that one? All right. right, word of warning. I always have to give this warning. If a question on the exam says solve it using completing the square, and you decide, nope, it's just a whole lot easier to do this, you will get 0 points for that question. Not a half credit, not a 1 point, 0 points. So yes, this is a whole lot easier, but you still have to know how to complete the square and how to do it the other ways. So just kind of a heads up. All right. Any questions on this one? All right. Okay, so let's say, for example, we wanted to solve 2x squared equals negative 4x minus 1. Okay. Now remember, it has to be in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. So if you made b equal negative 4, you would end up with the wrong answer. You have to bring everything to one side. So you end up, well, not negative 2x squared, with 2x squared. If you add 4x to both sides, plus 4x. If you add 1 to both sides, plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so remember, everything has to be on one side for the quadratic formula. Okay, so we know now our a is equal to 2, our b is equal to 4, and our c is equal to 1. Okay, so we know that x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so that's going to equal negative b, so that's negative 4, plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 1, all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 2. Oh, let me straighten that 2 up a little bit. Okay, so that means it's going to equal negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times 2 is 8 all over 4. So that's going to equal negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 8 is 8. So you have the square root of 8 over 4, which is negative 4 plus or minus, since 8, work that out here, square root of 8 is equal to square root of 4 times square root of 2. So you have 2 square root of 2. So 2 square root of 2 divided by 4. And actually, this one can be simplified. Because if you make it, and I'll bring this down here, just kind of continue it there. You have negative 4 over 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 2 over 4. These two cancel each other out. And these two simplify. So you have x equals negative 1 plus or minus square root of 2 over 2. Or if you wanted to make it to where you have two fractions, so you can either leave it that way, or if you make this 2 over 2, x equals negative 2 over 2 plus or minus square root of 2 over 2. which equals -2 plus or minus square root of 2 over 2. So they may want it that way, or they could want it separated. So they should tell you how they want it. All right. Any questions on that one? All right. Okay, let's do writing. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to look at the rules for discriminants. Okay, so we already know that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is your quadratic formula. This part of your quadratic formula, so the square root, well, you might as well say b squared minus 4ac, b squared minus 4ac is called your discriminant. Okay. So I guess you can call them properties of discriminants. Okay. So we know that when your discriminant is positive, you have two distinct solutions, real solutions. So when b squared minus 4ac is positive, I'll say there are two distinct real solutions. Okay. So let's say, for example, we calculated our b squared minus 4ac, and it came out to equal 11. Okay, so let b squared minus 4ac equal 11. We did all the calculating, plugged in all the numbers, and it came out to equal 11. So that means you have x equals negative, let's say b is equal to 2, plus or minus square root of 11 over 5. Just random numbers. That means x can equal negative 2 plus square root of 11 over 5, or it can equal negative 2 minus square root of 11 over 5. Okay, so you have two different solutions, as long as it's positive. Okay, so let's say if our b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, it's negative. We plugged in all those values and came out with a negative number. So when b squared minus 4ac is negative, then there are, got an E, two complex solutions. That are complex conjugates of each other.